I'm Wayne Burdick, N6KR, and I have not been to Dayton since 2019. The world ended, and my wife wouldn't let me go to super spreader events anymore. But I'm glad to be back. Spread it, please. And just like Father Thomas Witherspoon, I am here to preach to the choir. Let's see. So KH1 is, I've probably said this about several other rigs in the past, but honestly, the KH1 really is the radio I've been trying to design since I was 14. I really wanted to get out of the house. I did Boy Scouts, I went camping, I went hiking, and just the thrill of being out in nature has always been kind of fundamental to my idea of ham radio. So I'm going to talk about how the KH1 came to be, what led into it, and why it exists, what you would do with a KH1. And I just like to thank my homies here, Rob Capon, W3DX, who has never been to Dayton, but he's anxious to come here. Big DX QRP guy, and Fred, KT5X. A lot of people know Fred. He's a quite famous soda operator. I have hiked with Fred, and my son, who's 19, and I had trouble keeping up with Fred at almost 80, hiking up a peak in Colorado. He's a former trail runner, but also a real inspiration for things like keyer paddles and logbook trays. And then Steve WG0AT, again, one of our early field testers for several radios, including the KH1. And Steve's claim to fame is that whenever his wife is off using the bathroom, he gets the KH1 out and makes a contact. And Rich Hynek, AC7MA. Rich was an Elecraft engineer for many years, and the only way I could bring Rich out of retirement was to offer him, the opportunity to work on the KH1. I got him inspired. He came out and did the PC boards for me. You guys will recognize this quote, hopefully. If there is a place and you can get to it, you must operate from there. This is from Aid Weiss, W0RSP. I haven't seen Aid in many, many years. I assume Aid is no longer around. Does anybody know? Okay, wow. We're going way back in QRP ARCI history here, but Adrian Weiss was one of the luminaries in QRP. So I believe it was Rob Capon, W3DX, who told me, don't talk about the KH1 as a rig. It's a station. And that's really the idea. It's not just about what's inside the radio. There are many variations on small QRP radios. There are many of them that are very capable. You've heard presentations about several of them today. It's great to have such a dynamic ecosystem of design and implementation going on in this hobby and in the industry. But what I was aiming for is a station, a fully integrated station. And that involves a little bit of new thought, some 3D modeling, some 3D printing of what it means to ergonomically satisfy the requirements for outdoor operation. And in my case, it means what can I do to make a radio that is small enough that I can stick it in my back pocket, have it be the entire station, I can go trail running, I can be hiking up a hill and changing a log sheet and using the keyer paddle without breaking a sweat. That's my idea of integration of a station. And for that, you need a different variation on the user interface, and hopefully, an antenna that doesn't get in the way, and a means of logging that just similarly does the job and has some redundancy built in. I'll talk about both electronic and paper logging, and schemes for keeping the radio in a tight little unit that there is absolutely no excuse to not take with you wherever you go. I don't care if you're at a business meeting, sitting around a boardroom table, you should be able to use your radio just about anywhere, from there to Mount Kilimanjaro. I will mention a couple of counterexamples to what I am talking about today. This is one of my favorite counterexamples. I think I've probably shown this slide in the past, but these folks are on top of a mountain in Canada and just begging for chiropractic bills. This is not a good way to operate Boardable. Desktop radios were not really intended for this kind of operation, as you can see. Antennas also are a favorite topic of mine, and Tom spent so much time elucidating what you can do with a compromised antenna that I'll skip some of my usual preaching and just focus on some of the other interesting aspects of it. But this is a typical portable antenna, and it probably worked quite well. But like Tom said, you can get by with a lot less if your goal is to get in, get out. If portability is your real aim. This is another counterexample. I may be the only person to ever put a 12-volt gel cell inside a K4 and carry it by the handle and make a contact with an AX1 attached to it. I then got a little smarter and put it on a rock. That made things a little easier. But yeah, the K4 is not a 10-pound handheld. Here's some other examples. So I really want to observe first that a lot of the creativity in the QRP and portable operating genre is embodied in these two slides. How many people here have home rolled either a radio or antenna or a logging system? Good, yeah. So you guys know what it means. This is half the fun. When I'm doing it, I'm trying to figure out a way to do it that also like gets the attention of a few of my friends. But there's a lot that goes into station design, and everybody's got their own particular way of optimizing the ergonomics of their station for the way they operate. These are two examples where all of the different pieces of the system are independent. So my goal was to basically shove all that stuff into a very small space. Here's another example. It can get quite unwieldy if your goal is to actually, like ascend a peak in 20 minutes, operate for 5 minutes, and then take off. Now, CWHT, this is the world's shortest oxymoron. But it isn't, actually, it turns out. Turns out you really can operate CW handheld. But I want to just tell a little story that is the inspiration for a lot of my own design work. When I was 14, I got my novice license, and this was 1971, and I got on the air and didn't realize that the cable TV system on my street had a break in the coax cable in my garage. And so when I got on the air, it turned out that a guy who was going to become my Elmer, who lived about 3 blocks away, copied my call sign off of this television. And he turned out to be a great guy, a lot of Southern charm. He came down, he knocked on the door, and my mom answered. He said, "Hey, ma'am, I think you got a ham radio operator living here." He said, I think I'm gonna take and help you with his antenna. And so he helped me get my antenna system working. He fixed the coax cable, and I was back in business. But more important, I went over to his place, and he was a bachelor. And you can guess what that means, right? I mean, half of his house was consumed with gear. He'd done a beautiful job on it. But the thing he told me was that in 1957, which happens to be the year I was born, he said, he could go out in his front yard in San Diego and whip out a 5-watt AM Citizens Band handheld and work Australia. Okay, now I could not get that image out of my head. So ever since then, I have thought that is the magical inflection point at which I will realize that I have finally achieved my life goal. It's like, I want to work Australia with a handheld. And we have a pretty high sunspots peak right now. I don't know if it rivals 1957 even interstitially or like between peaks. But I can tell you that last year on my KX2, I was sitting in my backyard with a 4-foot whip on 10 meters, and I finally made that contact with Australia, just sitting there. And since then, I've made similar contacts, but the idea is that you really can make DX contacts with a handheld CW radio. It's one of those Zen things. And again, like Tom said, you know, make amateur radio your own. And if you want to like hike up a mountain peak and be talking on a radio and sending Morse code and logging contacts while you go, then, you know, that's my kind of operation. And I hope some of you enjoy it too. So as everybody knows, when you go out on an activation, there isn't necessarily any place to sit. This is why I needed a handheld radio, because, you know, even in California, we have all of the things listed on this screen to deal with. And if somebody can't read them in the back, I'll go through it pretty quick. Ants and spiders and ticks. All right. Oh my God. They crawl up your legs and they're just dying to bite you at every opportunity, especially if you're underneath an oak tree trying to hide from the sun. And it turns out there's 3 inches of oak leaves on the ground and you park your chair there for field day. Ask me how I know. I got a dozen bites that day. Puddles, mud, and snow. You guys have a lot more of that than we have in California. It's awful and can make operating a real challenge unless you're that Canadian guy who walks around with the 10-foot whip on his HF pack system. He seems to enjoy it. Tall weeds, thorns, sharp rocks, you name it. There isn't always a place to sit. Why CW? Tom went over this. Very high signal noise ratio. I think maybe some of the people who are new to CW and who decide they love it might love it for one of the reasons I do, which is that you can do it without waking up anybody at night. You know, it's kind of like you know, watching a movie with the headphones on. You can do it without bothering people. If you're on sideband, unless you're doing digital voice recorder, then everybody knows you're operating your ham radio, right? Very high signal noise ratio. Oh, and definitely use a counterpoise, like Tom said. The actual figure that I measured for trying to operate a station without a counterpoise versus with the counterpoise was about 3 S units average. So you can make contacts if the band's open without a counterpoise, but it's hard. CW is still used for the majority of HF SOTA contacts and, of course, for POTA. Data modes. Well, don't get me started. I'm not an FT8 person. I'm just going to leave it at that. And you don't need a computer with CW. What you're looking at is the gloved hands of one of my heroes, Wes Hayward, W7ZOI. And Wes got it right. And you'll see that thing that he's holding there. It's a very interesting size. It's a palm-sized device. In his case, this is a single, you know, it's like a 40-meter direct conversion transceiver with a couple of crystals and a switch to choose between them. It has some sort of a keyer he built into it later based on a 555 timer. So this is a very simple half-watt radio, and the antenna that he used was basically he would throw up a dipole using a hiking pole as the center feed point, or as the mast for it, and he'd be up above the tree line. And I've always been very inspired by this image, and I'll show you one later on that kind of brings it back full circle. So my first crack at doing a handheld CW rig was this little thing I call a koala. It's 1 inch by 2 inches by 4 inches. Again, like Wes's radio, this is 40 meters, half a watt, uses a couple of 9-volt batteries inside, has a couple of innovations, you know, built-in keyer, VCXO, and it's a superhead. Really tiny, and yeah, I made a few contacts on it, but I aspired to have more bands and more modes. So this is my first real attempt at a handheld radio. This is the Elecraft KH1. And it's nominally a 40 and 20 meter transceiver. As you can see, it has a high efficiency red LED display that only drew a few milliamps. And it's a superhet, 4-pole crystal filter. And that keyer paddle is an interesting thing. That was back before I figured out that a keyer paddle really did not have to come out at a 45-degree angle, but I thought it was cool at the time, and it was a very interesting challenge to make. Paddles have gotten smaller and more sophisticated since then, but that was one of the enabling technologies for the KX1 to make it out of the lab. Oh, by the way, another thing about the KX1 is, yeah, it starts out as 40 and 20 meters, but we also had an option module to add 30 and 80 meters. The 30-meter module was $29, which, as I pointed out years ago, was less than $1 a meter. So 4 watts, angled paddle. This is the first time I used any surface mount parts, back in 2003. And man, I'll tell you, it was a hurdle to get over. I'd written so many kit manuals describing how to put through-hole parts in that you know, I had to get brave to do surface mount. But the DDS chip, yeah, that had to be surface mount. Oh, the KX1 also included an automatic antenna tuner, which was pretty unique for radios in this class at the time. I don't know, maybe there might not have even been another radio in this class at the time, but it had a very small narrow-range auto tuner that only worked with a particular length of wire, 26 feet, tossed in a tree. And in the KH1, there's a much wider range auto tuner that's a lot smaller. That was a neat trick. And here again, I have to thank Rich, AC7MA, for helping me squeeze all this stuff into a very small space. KX2, you know, up until KH1 design came out, I would use the KX2 for all of my portable activations. KX2's become a pretty successful radio among SOTA and POTA operators, and just for QRP in general, people who want to have a home station that weighs a pound. The thing about the KX2 though is for a lot of the operating I do, which is day hikes, you know, I'm out climbing around the cliffs at the beach, or I'm like out in Pinnacles south of San Francisco. KX2 is just a little bit too heavy as a handheld. It weighs about 1.5 pounds with the batteries installed, and it's great for all band, all mode operation. Comes with a mic. It comes with an attached keyer pedal. But you'll notice, of course, that the display is really targeted at desktop operation. So again, this is all input to the KH1 equation. But the question was, how do you permute this user interface to make it really work well for handheld operation? So here, in fact, here I am using a KH1 or KX2. Sorry, the KX2 is actually uses the same display as the KX3 and the K3, which is it's a 240 segment. Low multiplex rate LCD that I had to design from scratch. And those 240 segments, that was a very interesting task, trying to figure out, like, okay, which of the segments do I want to use? How big are they going to be? Where am I going to place them on? Because you only get one chance, right? It's going to be cast into glass. And in fact, in order to get the VFOB display to also be alphanumeric, I had to invent a 13-segment alphanumeric character set for those displays. But as you can see, it works handheld, but you got to kind of tilt your head if you want to look at the display head on. 22 ounces with battery. This is 80 through 10 meters. SWL coverage. It's a true SDR. It down converts to around 15 kilohertz, 8 kilohertz actually. And then the battery, 2.6 amp hour battery, lasts a long time because the KX2 only draws about 150 to 160 milliamps in receive mode. Very wide range automatic antenna tuner, and it even has a built-in mic. You can't see it because it's one of these tiny surface mount mics that's buried just behind the front panel, down next to my fingers there, next to the AF gain control. And the side-mounted paddle, that actually works really well. You know, that happens to be where your arm is if you bring it up like that. So it doesn't really have to be at a 45. 45 would actually not work quite as well. Oh, check, just back to the slide, the dimensions of the KX2, 1.5 by 2.8 by 5.8 inches. So the trick was, how am I going to make a radio that's half this weight and half the size and half the current drain and half the price, and maybe half as many bands, okay? So you can see there's a theme emerging. This is my son, Griffin, using a KX2 handheld on top of Sierra Buttes, which is a fantastic climb. It's, you only have to climb the last 1,000 or 1,500 feet or so. It has an amazing fire tower at the top. And if you want to see a picture of the stairs, out on our website, one of our newsletters has an article written titled, On Second Thought, I'll Take the Stairs. And it's really about me introducing a friend to CW. This friend was into FT8. And this is the kind of guy who'd use the elevator instead of the stairs. So I convinced him to use the stairs. But if you want to see real stairs, go to Sierra Buttes. The last bit of it is about, I think, 300 steps up this staircase to get to the fire tower. And the view is incredible. You can actually see all the way to Yosemite and Shasta and Mount Lassen from this peak. It's a 70-mile radius in all directions on a clear day. So now let's talk about the KH1. H, by the way, the H in KH1, that's for handheld. I'd like to believe we might have more H mode or H class radios in the future. Unfortunately, there aren't any now, but it would be a blast, and it's a possibility. So the KH1 really is about form factor. It's the size and weight of an HT. As you can see, the keyer paddle is plugged in at the bottom, and that's where the knobs are. And so it turns out that when you're holding an HT, you really don't want to be moving your hand up to the top to get to the knobs. You really want the knobs to be right here next to the keyer paddle where the action is. So the KH1 is 1.2 by 2.3 by 4.4 inches. And trust me, I remember every millimeter of that, just to mix my metaphors, in the process of trying to design the 3D model for this thing. That's really tiny, and it just fits in your hand like a small HT. It weighs about 12 ounces with the built-in lithium-ion battery, about a 2.6 amp-hour battery pack. So just to cover the features briefly, it's 5 bands, 40, 30, 20, 17, and 15, plus a separate band that's used for SWL coverage anywhere in its tuning range. It typically draws anywhere from 40 to 70 milliamps in receive. It will do sideband cross mode. This is a feature that Bruce N6KR has insisted on since I started designing radios. He likes to get on the bands and operate cross mode. And I've actually found cross mode to be really useful, especially on things like the noontime net on 7255, which is a West Coast phenomenon. I don't know, do you guys have sideband nets on 40 meters where you could conceivably log in to the net, sign into the net in CW and not get chased away? Okay. Yeah, no, they're generally pretty friendly, and contrary to opinion, you can get on a sideband net and operate CW, and somebody will know CW. It's almost guaranteed. So this has what I call a medium range ATU. It doesn't have as many inductors and capacitors and relays as the KX2's or KX3's auto tuner, but it turns out that it works with a very wide range of antennas, and I'll talk more about the ATU later on. There's the bottom mounted paddle, and the built-in whip, which I'm going to talk about at length here, is really the thing that makes the KH1 a KH1. As opposed to attaching something like an AX1, which has its own loading coil, the KH1 has the loading coil built in, and the whip clips to the side. So let's get to that. Here's an excerpt from the 3D model showing what the keyer paddle looks like, just monochrome. That's the basic form factor. That was actually what the first generation one looked like. And now the current version of this keyer paddle actually has paddles that are a little bit bigger, and it has more adjustment range, and I'll get to that. Here's an X-ray view of the KH1. As you can see, it's almost all battery. At the far left end of the battery, you'll see a PC board mounted vertically. That is the automatic antenna tuner. And the red thing right next to the antenna tuner is the T44-6 core, toroid core, that's used for the two windings to cover 15, 17, and 20 meters with the internal whip. So it's buried in there pretty deep, but it's right next to the auto tuner, so there's, like a low loss path between the two. At the far right end of the battery, there's another PC board mounted vertically. That is the built-in battery charger. So it will charge the internal lithium-ion battery at a C/10 rate, which is about 250 milliamps, current limited. You can actually charge it from a solar panel. And so what I've done, what some other people do, you can basically put a little solar panel on your pack and just keep it connected to the power jack of the KH1. And when you're not on the air, it'll be charging the battery for you in the background. You don't have to turn the radio on to keep the charger running. This charger also has a nice feature, which is that there's no DC to DC converter built into it. So it's very, very quiet. You can just charge without, you don't need some sort of a special external charger. You can charge it from anything from a car battery to another lithium-ion or phosphate battery that's 12.5 volts or higher. You can power it from the same bench supply that you use at home. So the cool thing is that the battery and the charging, or the external jack, so that there's an internal jack, which you can see there, that the battery's plugged into. That same jack is on the outside, okay? And they're diode ORed together. So what that means is that you can have the battery plugged in inside, and you can plug another battery from the outside, or you can plug in a power supply. If that external supply has a high enough voltage, it will charge the internal battery, whether the radio is on or off. And because of the diodes, what happens is whichever power source has the higher voltage is the one that's going to power the radio at a given time. So let's say that your battery was, or let's say you were, out in the field and using a small solar panel that gives you maybe, 200 milliamps. Not enough for transmit, but plenty for charging the battery and for operating the radio and receive. So when you hit the key, what's going to happen is, because of the diode ORing, it's going to draw that amp or amp and a half, whatever it is, from the internal battery instead of from the solar panel, just when you key down. As soon as you key up, it's going to go back to using the solar panel for charging and running the receiver. Here's another interior look at the KH1. This is the top side. Used a conventional 2-line by 16 character LCD and 4 push button switches, which I'll get to. This is kind of a challenge coming up with a user interface that works with just 4 switches plus the 2 knobs. This is the bottom side of the main board on the interior, and again, you can see here the battery chargers on the left end, and the automatic antenna tuner, the BNC, the whip mount, and the toroid are all on the right end. And then you can see the 4-pole crystal filter in the middle. So just briefly, here's some of the top line features about the KH1 that make it great for field use. So the keyer speed is not adjusted with a knob. It's actually 2 of the tap functions of those 4 buttons. So Rich talked me into that. He said, don't use a knob for keyer speed. Use up and down of those 2 buttons, because that way he can quickly change from, like 18 words per minute to 22 words per minute to 24. So it's just faster in the heat of battle, particularly for SOTA operation. It has 6 message buffers and 50K of double EEPROM that is, for double EEPROM is electrically erasable, programmable, random access memory, and or ROM, which we know is a place where you can store stuff more or less, semi-permanently. So this is a chip that we use in the KH1 just for storing log data. Okay, so if you are in transmit mode and you've got the logging turned on, then every time you send a character with either your keyer paddle or an external keyer paddle, the internal keyer will decode what you send and save it in the log as ASCII text. And so later on, if you want, you can then connect it to a computer and dump your logbook that way. So if you're a SOTA activator, it's great because you have the alternative of either using the paper log or letting the electronic log just capture everything that you send, including the call signs of the stations that you work. It has both a speaker and a headphone jack. The speaker is very small, but it still gets the job done in a pinch. I typically use headphones. If it's quiet out, I'll use the speaker. Sometimes the wind noise is a little bit too much for the speaker, in which case headphones are there. It has an interesting feature, which is what I call the mini pan. And basically, I think I have a picture of that later on, but the idea is, suppose that you're half awake and you just want to let the radio do the work of telling you whether the band is open or not. You know, you can take a nap while the radio sits there, and you put the KH1 into scan mode, and you can scan plus and minus 5, plus and minus 10, plus and minus 15 kilohertz from your VFO frequency. And if the band's dead, you'll hear just white noise, right? But if a station comes up while that scan's happening, you'll start hearing a blip, and then stop the scan, go find the station, and now you've opened a dead band, basically. The scanning also has a visual element to it. So there's one of the rows on the display becomes kind of a miniature pan adapter with 8 voltage levels, and so you can see the signals as they come up also. Of course, we've also got RIT and XIT, which are very useful for operating split and for SOTA. Here's what the display looks like in its normal mode. We've got the VFO frequency, the mode, and the RIT or XIT offset on the first line. The second line has your S meter reading. The little resistor symbol there is telling me that I've got the 10 dB attenuator turned on. There's a fatter resistor symbol to tell you if you've got the 30 dB attenuator turned on. That's useful if you're in a situation where you're like side by side with another SOTA operator and you're both on the same band, and you drop in an attenuator so that you can continue to operate even if that situation is unavoidable. The next icon, the little trident there, that tells you that the auto tuner is in. Then there's a battery level indicator, and then Zulu time, which is when you're making contacts, it periodically timestamps and date stamps the log, so that in addition to knowing what you sent, you know what band you were on, what mode you were on, and what the time was. You can also see in this image the labels on the 4 switches. So what we came up with for the user interface on the KH1 with only 4 switches was the idea that almost everything except these 4 tap operations, everything else is going to be 2 switch presses. So if you're changing the keyer speed, it's just 1 switch press. If you're tuning the automatic antenna tuner because you moved 5 feet and your terrain changed or your body capacitance changed for some reason, then you just tap the ATU button. That's also just a single switch tap. Then there's the message button. You tap message, and you then follow that with 1, 2, or 3, or you can actually go down a level and pick the 4, 5, and 6 messages. But everything else is a kind of a submenu, like a 1-level submenu. So if I were to press and hold the 1 button, which is labeled receiver, it would then pull up 2 lines, and the upper line would give me filter 1, filter 2, filter 3, or exit, and then the bottom line gives me 0 dB, 10 dB, 30 dB, and RIT. So that's the basic concept of the user interface, is that each one of these functions has 8 sub-functions. So you bring up the sub-function menu, and then you tap the one that you want, and then it exits. So it's a compromise, right? 4 buttons, which fits really nicely in the box, but you have to press 2 switches to get a lot of things done. It seemed like a reasonable compromise, and so far it seems to be working out. Logging. Okay, I've talked about this a bit already, but here's an example of what a lot of my friends use for their loggings in the field. Typically, you'll have a small radio that's very competent. You'll have an antenna, and everything gets attached to a clipboard. And again, this is where a lot of the creativity in the hobby comes from, is people making their own clipboards, making their own antennas. It's like there's been a Precambrian explosion of QRP field operating methods over the past 10 or 20 years, for sure. And this is just one example of hundreds that are out there. My first attempt to put the log on the radio is these little log sheets attached to the back of the KH1. Cut them out, attach them to the feet. This is a very early cut on what I thought the KH1's log tray was going to look like. Let's see, I pushed the button too fast there. So as you can see, the keyer paddle looks different. It's it's up above the tray. The tray flips around and is held on by a thumb screw. So that was one possible way to do it. On the left there, you'll see another early prototype of the log. So in this case, it's a little notepad, a little flip style notepad that I had to cut all the pages in half so I could still see the display. And that is actually what I used for Field Day 2023. I think I probably walked somewhere between 4 and 6 miles on Field Day, making contacts while I was walking, which was the whole point, to try and prove whether this works or not. On the right side is another early version of the log tray. As you can see, there's a little U-shaped wire bail up at the top of the pad of paper. So even though that works and holds the paper down, it has 2 problems. One is the wind flips the pages if it comes up. And 2, you cannot change the sheets with one hand. It's very difficult. So the question was, how can we make a logbook tray that solves both the wind problem and the paper handling problem? And it seems kind of obvious now, but and this is so low tech. But my degree is actually in cognitive science, not double E, and so like I love these challenges that turn out to be really about ergonomics. How do you make something that suits the user? So this is about the 4th iteration, and the way this works is, and I'll be happy to show it to you on the real thing if you want to see it, is the logbook tray actually functions as a cover for the radio when it's closed. And that means because the knobs and the keyer paddle are right down there at the bottom of the radio, even when the logbook tray is folded over and closed on the radio, protecting the display and the switches, you can still operate. So if it's raining, close the display over, if it's raining hard. As for the log sheets though, if you look closely at the way the paper is oriented in the tray, you'll see that the right-hand edge peeks out from underneath those 2 pieces of plastic that are holding the paper stack down. So the stack is held in place by those 2 rails, but you can take your thumb and peel off one sheet. And again, I'll have to show you on the real thing, but there are little indentations that allow you to then peel that sheet off and then tuck one corner of it back in underneath the stack. So the whole thing can be done with one hand. And there is the log tray closed, showing you what it looks like for storage or like when you tuck it in your pocket. And we include a pen with it. This is a mini pen. It'll also work with a space pen, by the way. The smaller space pen, the one that's only 3.9 inches long. 3D modeling. Okay, so with any project like this where you're trying to use every last cubic centimeter of space, 3D modeling is actually imperative. I tried to do this stuff with 2D modeling until about 10 years ago when I finally got a clue and learned how to do modeling in a program which I highly recommend for anybody who has even the slightest interest in modeling spatial systems of any kind, anything from a house addition to the way you're going to arrange your furniture in a room and you want to see what it's going to look like ahead of time. If you're designing a radio, SketchUp. Believe me, it is an awesome program. It's SketchUp. It's actually been around quite a while and they've been evolving it ever since. And it's a fantastic modeling tool. It's not as sophisticated as things like SolidWorks, which comes with a massive price tag also. But SketchUp is great for designing small items, and you'll see some examples here. Oh, not just 3D modeling, 3D printing. The KH1, and I know you guys can't see it from way back there, but in a KH1 with all the options attached or installed on the inside, I think we're up to somewhere between 7 and 8 3D printed parts, and that allows us to quickly prototype, quickly change the design if something doesn't work out in manufacturing, and that did happen a couple of times. So rapid prototyping, rapid model changes, that's what 3D printing and modeling are all about. Here's an example. This is the lower plastic panel down here at the bottom of the KH1 where the knobs are. And you can see the holes for the knobs in this image, but what you can also see is the speaker. So that is a 1.1 inch long by 0.6 inch wide dynamic speaker. And it has, it's actually, the grill for the speaker is actually part of the cantilevered mechanism that's used to open the back cover, which brings me to another point about 3D modeling and 3D printing, is that you can take mechanical functions that used to require several different parts and merge them into a single 3D printed part. We take advantage of that wherever possible because it saves space and it saves stocking items, right? You can use one thing. So there are actually two other elements in this 3D printed bottom panel that I'd like to call to your attention. So if you look directly above the speaker, you'll see something right-angled and golden hued, all right? That is actually the Allen wrench for the keyer. So you open the back panel and pop out the Allen wrench, and now you can adjust the set screws if you ever need to in the field. And then there's another golden hued thing up to the upper left there. That's actually a 440 nut. That's, again, it's captivated by a little recess in the plastic and a little cantilevered bail. And you can, so if you're out in the field and you lose your, the thumb nut on your ground post, which has happened to me, then you pop the back cover open and pry the nut out with the Allen wrench, of course, pull the nut out and then put it back on there and you're ready to continue operating. Here's a fairly recent update of the keyer paddle. As you can see again here, you can imagine why 3D modeling is critical to something like this. The 3D printed parts are made of nylon and it's very rugged. It's incredibly lightweight. It's more or less moisture resistant. And you can make threads in it just by threading a screw in. So you see there's, in this view, it's easy to see two of the threaded fasteners here. They are being used as the stops, the adjustable stops for the keyer. And there are two other set screws in there that are being used to adjust the contact spacing distance. And in the most recent edition of the paddle, we've added two more thumb screws, or two more set screws, so you can adjust where the paddles start, you know, the unactivated position. So 3 separate adjustments, which means you can really dial it in. And for me, the way I test a keyer paddle is if I can send the whole alphabet at 30 words per minute without making a mistake, then the paddle's working. It has a moderately stiff spring on it because this is for field use. And you know, if you're walking while you operate like I do, the vibration can be a problem if you have a keyer paddle that has spacing that's too tight or too fragile, too soft. Here's a false color look at the log showing an example of the log sheets. And if you look right next to where it says on the right-hand side there, you see the last column. You'll see there's a little dip in the plastic. That's the place I was talking about earlier where you can actually stick the corner of the paper back underneath. And so as long as you got a stack of 10 sheets in there, it won't flutter and it'll be really easy to slide another sheet back underneath. Oh, yeah, now you can see the little dips where you can put the corners of the paper. Actually, another thing about this is you see how the pen, the ballpoint pen, is retained by yet another intricate little cantilevered clip. And it just snaps in place and it stays there. The things that are shown in red, those are the little sliding rails. Those snap into the housing. And so when you unfold the top, so it's normally closed, it comes open like that. And so once you've opened it, you then pull it out an additional ½ inch or so. Of course, you have to remove the whip first, but there's a place for your fingers in here because of the slides. This is the custom carrying case that comes with the KH1, also designed in SketchUp. Antennas. Well, there's WG0AT from about, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago. And typical field antenna, probably took him half an hour to put it up. But I'm sure it worked well. And here's Paul. I think his call sign is, or I can't remember his call, but he's, what is it?
W0.
Oh yeah, W0R0. Yes, RW. He's quite the HF pack guy. He's very active, and as you can see, he's out tromping around the snow most of the time. AX1, AX2, both use the same whip. Tom covered those pretty well. Those are our antenna products that work with any radio. Here's a KX2 with a early version of the AX or the AX1 whip. Oh, that one also shows the right angle adapter and the bipod. As you can see, the radio is braced by the bipod, which it has the two metal legs, and the KH1 has an equivalent to that I'll show you. Okay, so the KH1 actually has two antenna connectors. One is a BNC for connecting any of your traditional antennas, like a half-wave in-fed, your EHFT, or whatever that acronym is. I can't ever remember it. A vertical, a random wire thrown in a tree. So that's what the BNC is for. And then there's a separate post. It's a marine grade M4 threaded post, which is what the whip attaches to. So two antennas. And then there's a switch in the top panel, which I think I show. Yeah. So here's a look at the top of the radio. And as you can see, there's a slide switch there. And to the right of the slide switch is that whip post I was mentioning. And so when you are using the whip, then you put the slide switch into either the 20-meter position or the 15 and 17-meter position, and then you use the ATU to do the final matching. And that actually works quite well over various kinds of terrain. If you're not using the whip, then you can put the switch into the center off position, and at that point, the whip is disconnected. It's not necessary, but it will make it less likely that you'll get an RF burn if you forget. And the BNC connector, though, is always in the circuit. It's always attached to the ATU. So the ATU works for both antennas. Here's a interior view of this top end panel on the radio. And here again is a case where 3D printing allows us to do all kinds of things that were virtually impossible with things like, a combination of sheet metal and PC boards. It would just take so many more parts and it would take a lot more space. So this top panel, as you can see, has multiple functions. It's the place where the BNC jack comes through. And it's not held in place right there. That's done on the heatsink. There's actually a metal heatsink on the inside. But this is a place that registers the BNC jack. It registers the ground screw, and you can see that kind of in the middle. That ground screw is also the thing that holds the PA tab from the aluminum and ceramic substrate PC board that we use with our 10-watt MOSFET. And you can see that it's also captivating that red rectangular thing there. That is the switch, the center off SPDT switch. And then there's the toroid for matching the whip. And that toroid can probably handle 50 watts, but we're only operating it at 5 watts. So it has excellent Q. So some people are using the KH1 not handheld, but on a picnic table or other flat operating surface. And so for that, we designed this thing called the KHRA1. It's a right angle adapter. And it folds up into this. And again, it's false color, but the idea is that you can store the whip with the right angle adapter, and it basically takes up almost no space inside your bag or your small plastic case. And the 3D or the right angle adapter attaches to the whip post directly. So you notice the BNC jack is still free for something else if you wanted it to be. But this is a 90-degree adapter for the whip itself. Now I have to mention that the first version of the KHRA1 that we started shipping about a month and a half, 2 months ago, actually had this eccentricity or idiosyncrasy where you have to hold it together when you take the thumb screw off that adapts to the whip post. Otherwise, you might lose some pieces. So I got a clue after the customer support department said, you know, we need to keep that thing from falling apart. So the newest edition of the right angle adapter actually has a captivated piece of, it's a self-retaining nut buried inside the 3D printed housing, so that when you take the adapter nut off, you don't lose the rest of the hardware. So we do learn from our mistakes, and again, this is where 3D printing absolutely shines. I probably don't need to tell you guys this. You need a counterpoise. If your goal is to work some contacts, to build your confidence so that you can then work more stations, work the loud ones first. This is especially true for contests like Field Day or, you know, like an ARLDX contest. Work the loud ones first. You know, you can actually get the hang of it, learn what it means to tune them in, learn what it means to have a contact. Contests are a perfect place for any kind of QRP CW activity because the stations at the other end are going to have great antennas. And the thing about great antennas is it doesn't matter how much power you're using, it's going to make your signal better, not just theirs. Here's Steve, WG0AT. On the very first day that he got his hands on a KH1, he got one of the first prototypes, and he was like a 12-year-old, 80-year-old. Yeah, he's having a blast there. And that's it for the slides, and I'll be happy to take questions. Thank you. Anybody have a question about the KH1? Yes, sir.
Steve on the mic, so people on mic.
Okay.
Great presentation. Here's my Visa card.
That's the metric that I use.
Dennis WR4I, Charlottesville, Virginia. Can you mention again about the battery? Can you take the battery out and put, like, if you had a spare battery, is it replaceable?
Yeah, and in another example of learning from my mistakes, probably some of you had the KX2 before you had a internal battery charger for it. You know, you suffered like the rest of us with having to pull the battery out, unplug it, and plug it onto the charger. And, you know, we all got tired of that. And it turned out that Rich, the guy who helped me with the KH1, he had done a skunkworks project to make a little tiny battery charger for the KX2. And that's what became the KX BC2. And so we have essentially the same thing in the KH1. The difference is that, you know, the charger's available now. We don't have to wait. And also there's no connector, there's no speaker connector that has to be disassembled, you know, or that's at risk of coming out when you're changing the battery. So it's just a lot simpler. The speaker is frozen in place, so it's not going to get in the way of the battery cable like on the KX2. But if you have a KX2 with an internal charger, then you also don't have the problem. Does that answer the question?
Great. What other contest that I do on Mondays is called MST. Anybody does do that?
Yep.
Meeting and speak test. Mondays, every Monday, 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 11 o'clock at night with the work. Can't get on time. But it's a great way to get up to CW. And these guys, I've been doing the QRP since they've done it. They all hear me. So.
Yeah, I'll put in a pitch for the CW Ops contests too. Those guys absolutely light up the bands when they're on contest evenings or afternoons. And it's a great way to work a bunch of states on QRP with a bunch of really crack operators. Anybody else? Is that? Yes.
Yeah, I noticed that you spoke admiringly of the design process and the tool's ability to let you find clever ways to do things. So I have two questions. One is, did the ability to do that make the design cycle longer or shorter? And what 3D CAD package did you actually use to do the designs?
Okay. So it makes the design process longer because you discover all kinds of new opportunities to fold things into the design that you didn't think you would. You know, so the KH1 started life as, okay, this is going to be a handheld radio, a handheld CW rig. But because of the 3D modeling, it ended up being something that had, you know, a plug-in reversible keyer paddle and a log tray that solves the paper handling problem and a built-in whip, you know. So the modeling it just creates opportunities. As for the package that was used, 100% of the KH1 was designed in SketchUp. All of the sheet metal, all the plastic parts, everything was exported directly from SketchUp and went straight to the vendors.
You spoke about the mechanical design. What about the electronic topology? Is it a standard superhet, SDR, what?
Sure. Yeah, so obviously, I don't need to tell you guys that you can make a simple superhet that does a dynamite job. And a small superhet actually has some advantages in a situation like this. The current drain's super low. It meant that I could use a bunch of firmware from previous products that I had used because the radio functions are all done in hardware. And so I was able to reuse most of the KX2's firmware for this, except for some new things like the pan adapter function. Yeah, I mean, I think, did I answer your question? Okay.
What do you use for counterpoise when you're transmitting while you're walking?
Just the same counterpoise wire we supply with the radio. It's so for 2017 and 15, it turns out that a 13-foot long counterpoise is a good compromise. It's really cut for 20 meters. Now you might think that for 20 meters you'd want a 16-foot counterpoise, right? But that's in free space. That's a quarter wave free space counterpoise length. If a good portion of your wire is lying on the ground or wrapped around your leg or wherever, I mean, then it turns out that that because of capacitance and other effects, 13 feet is a good, you know, like round figure on 20 meters for optimal coupling. Anything longer than that, it doesn't really buy you much. It is certainly possible to add more counterpoise wires. And like Tom mentioned, you know, you can deploy as many counterpoise wires as you want. But the spirit of the KH1 is to be on the air in about 20 seconds. And actually, if you're operating like I do, which is, hey, there's a ridge that I want to get to because I'm channeling Aid Weiss and it's a place and I can get to it. When I see the place I'm going, I take the radio out of my pocket while I'm still walking and I'm actually on the air before I get there. Okay, so I don't want to deploy 5 or 6 counterpoise wires. I just want to drag one and have it be the one that I'm using when I get to my operating position.
So you generally don't have people hiking behind you?
Yeah, I've had to dodge dogs and deer and pedestrians. But you know, another nice thing about a radio that's this size is this is a stealth radio. I mean, you can operate in the bathroom if you want to. Nobody will know. I've used it from everywhere imaginable. I mean, like one of my favorite antennas is something where I climb a tree and then drop a wire down from the radio while I'm inside the tree. I call that the inverted vertical. So yeah, you can operate from anywhere, and that's really the point.
Wayne, we have 3 more questions. This one's from Zoom.
Okay.
This is Greg Franklin. I noticed that KH1 was relatively slow to launch. Just wondered if production is ramping up yet, or are there supply chain issues? 73.
Oh man,
Yeah.
all of the above, yeah. So one thing that happened with the pandemic is it completely screwed up the supply chain, and it was like a roller coaster. Not only that, we had tariffs that jacked up some of our prices, 20–25% on parts. We were on an amazing roller coaster over the past 5–6 years, and the KH1, we encountered some of that with the KH1 as well. In fact, the last time I was here, like I said, was 2019. And that was the year that we introduced the K4. And then the ITSHE hit the ANFE, and we lost a lot of time. Our assemblers had to work at home, take a big box of parts, go work at home, because Santa Cruz County wasn't going to let anybody work in a facility with multiple people, nor were they going to let people like preach to a choir, you know, in one room. So it was all Zoom. How many did Zoom church during the pandemic? Yeah, right. No, that was, so anyway, we did have supply chain issues. Those have been largely solved at this point, and the radio has ramped up. And I suspect that if you were to order KH1 now, you're going to get it a lot faster than the poor people who ordered in October. Yeah.
Hey, Wayne,
Who's
is
got the
there,
mic?
when you charge the radio with solar panels, do you need some kind of charge controller, or would the radio, does it have a range of limits where it says, okay, I'm not going to charge, or I am going to charge up until I'm at this voltage level?
So I think the question is, you know, like, how much micromanagement do you have to do if you're going to put the radio on a solar panel? And the answer is none. You know, like the way, one way you can do it is, you know, you've got a small 12-volt panel, and the open circuit voltage from a small 12-volt panel is probably going to be more than 12 volts, right? So it's typically 14, 15 volts, something like that. If it's a small panel, then what you can do to avoid hitting the absolute maximum limit on the KH1, which is 15 volts, is just put a Zener diode, put a big Zener diode on the output of that solar panel. And anytime it wants to put out more than 15 volts because the load is light, then you'll just dissipate that power in the Zener diode, or you fold the panel up. But once you're out in the field and you've got the solar panel charging the battery, you'll see the charge indicator on the radio turn on and off if a cloud passes over. But it doesn't care. It manages the current and the voltage. It's regulated internally, and the whole thing is completely analog. There's no computer involved in the charging. It'll work with the power on or off. Hopefully you don't have to even think about it. Yeah.
Hi, Wayne. My name is Farhan. I'm here. Back here. Wayne.
Oh, way
Yeah.
back there. Okay,
Okay.
now I see.
My handle is Farhan, a big fan of yours, a home brewer, and we always look forward to your designs to study them. So in that context, I'm asking you, do you have any plans to, release the schematics of the KH1?
In California, we would say busted. So, you know, it's always a struggle to decide where the dividing line is between intellectual property and the common, you know, like being able to support those who are doing the design for everybody. Okay. But I am running a business. And so what usually happens is when we believe the schematics are completely stable, when we've gone through all the ECOs, everything's nailed down, then we'll release it. Now you notice there is a theory of operation in the manual. And the theory of operation is pretty detailed, and you could figure out everything just from that if you wanted to reverse engineer it. But the actual final schematics are not available. There's a block diagram available. I can't remember whether I put the block diagram in the manual yet. I think I did. I have to pull that up and take a look. But the final schematics are not available yet. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Wayne.
Okay, thank you.